I would like to start at the summit. You had in a recent note some very detailed back and forth, the pluses and minuses and what may actually not get taken care of in September. Could we start there for investors who may be thinking too much of this meeting?
And this is the summit between President Xi and President Trump, correct?
That's right.
That's right. I mean, I think, once again, expectations should be very, very low for what's about to happen. I think we're going to get a day-long summit, it looks like, at most, this time around. And both sides are trying to talk about deliverables. The Chinese side wants this to be super scripted and are very frustrated. The U.S. side doesn't understand why the Chinese side is so frustrated. But at the same time, they both agree there's not going to get a whole lot done at this meeting. The big deliverable that might come out of it are details and some finalization of what that so-called Board of Trade needs to look like. Don't expect much beyond that.
What do you mean? What is the Board of Trade? Walk us through that.
So the U.S. Trade Representative famously says, I am the Board of Trade. And what that means is that Ambassador Greer has agreed with his counterparts that we're going to pick about roughly $30 billion worth of things that we are happy to import from you, we consider to be non-strategic. You'll do the same, and we're going to manage trade between us. So unlike what we've thought of trade deals as saying, look, we're going to open up free flow of trade, this is more about actually saying we're going to decide what's truly free, and the rest of the stuff we're going to slap on tariffs.
Is that a good thing?
It's driven by a national security imperative. Okay. From that standpoint.
From both sides.
From both sides, certainly from our side, and I think the Chinese side will determine what their national security priorities are. So there are positives to it. I don't know how much it'll do in the long run, though, to take care of things like supply chain dependency on China and so forth, because it doesn't address the other critical issues like transshipment, which is a big one staring us.
Can you clarify how much we still rely on China in terms of supply chains, global supply chains?
Immense amount, right? There really isn't anything in our homes, in our industrial centers, in our data centers, really even factories that is not coming, our hospitals, is not coming by and large from China. What they did with rare earth metals really scared us, because I think it created this other discussion. Said, think about what if they did that with pharmaceuticals and surgical supplies and medical goods. Forget about everything else. Yeah, so a ton.
And Shehzad, I mean, that's why we're kind of here right now, right? We have the export controls that China puts in place on critical minerals and permanent magnets. The United States says we're going to do the same thing on chip technology. And ultimately, the two sides who are, heavy hitters in the world economy say, okay, we got to reach some sort of truce here to calm markets down globally and also to calm this diplomatic relationship down.
Yeah, and I think one idea was, really the predominant idea was that if the two leaders keep meeting each other, then the truce continues. Now everybody realizes the truce is because we need the truce because we don't have the rare earths and the magnets. We're wholly dependent on China.
We don't have a choice.
We don't have a choice. And the Chinese want the truce because that's the best way to keep kicking this thing down the road, to push off tariffs for as long as possible, run out the clock on Trump, and then you deal with whoever the next president is.
How's China feeling about the United States? And I bring that up because Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi will visit South Korea for 2 days from Wednesday to talk about North Korea and bilateral and global issues with South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun. And this is coming after President Trump ordered the Pentagon to reduce joint exercises with South Korea, citing their cost and his relationship with the North Korean leader. And there was also some connection with Iran and supporting in the denuclearization. What's your political read on that?
So I don't necessarily align myself with the idea that wherever the U.S. tries to withdraw from a geography or something, China will try to step in necessarily. But at the same time, China is always... Will it at least
embolden them?
I think it can certainly embolden them, even if they don't want to take action immediately. Certainly they may feel like they could, and potentially the probability of success goes up, if you will. So they're doing all of this. I think on the other hand, vis-a-vis even the United States, though, on the other hand, even when they're showing up here, they are taking an aggressive tack. They're saying, look, we're watching what's happening in Congress. We're watching that, you guys are not blaming us for an election interference, and we don't like this. Don't try to threaten the truce. So apparently the tough talk is happening behind the scenes.
I think oftentimes all of us kind of look at this from the perspective of the U.S. and what's the U.S. have in it. But maybe we could bring you in to look from the vantage point of China right now, right? There are economic pressures internally. How do those play in this broader discussion?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, this really is. I think she's, the genius move, if I can call it that. The economy internally is pretty weak. Not only is the consumption side weak, the household side weak, and not only are they completely sort of failing to embark upon this economic transition that they've been talking about for decade and a half, really, certainly at least the last 5-6 years in earnest. They are failing on all those accounts, yet they are able to, because the export machinery is running, they're able to, show up at the table and deal with the U.S. not just as competitors and equals, but ones that oftentimes look like they have the cards rather than us.
Does it ever matter? Because we always talk about Chinese deep pockets, right? And the government's always there to either boost up a company or boost up a sector. Those pockets are still pretty deep, right?
The pockets are still pretty deep, and whereas their traditional way of doing stimulus isn't working, we have to remember they haven't really attempted household style side stimulus at all. So that's a whole other playbook that they could resort to.
Will they?
They just don't ideologically like to do that.
No,
it is ironic. It's a communist party, and they don't like to do welfare.
Yeah.
But they could if they wanted to. Push come to shove.
I mean, all of this comes down to Zhao. That's the power that the Politburo, that the Communist Party has within China. Of course, I mean, the growing middle class since Deng Xiaoping, I mean, just speaks volumes to that. But as you embark on this AI transition, like what does that do to what is still a very deeply industrial-based jobs economy?
Yeah, I think that is a big challenge for them. They do not have an answer for this as yet. They're already staring at, obviously, a very large youth unemployment problem. These young people will eventually become older, so you have to do something about them, plus the new entrants. The Communist Party certainly has a big challenge ahead of itself from that.
Yeah, where are they in this transformation? We talk about whether it's EVs or, pick even AI, like how advanced they are certainly when it comes to robotics and so on and so forth. So it sounds like they're so advanced and that we should be worried. Yeah. But is that true?
They are advanced, and we have to remember that we're talking about...
And a risk to the U.S. in terms of high tech and so on.
Well, certainly. I mean, we can compete with them at this point when it comes to things like robotics, right? There's no factory in America that could just say, oh, yeah, we're competing with the Chinese when it comes to automation and robotics and such. And we have to remember, we're talking about AI-related job losses a lot in this country now. That transition to automation, especially in the manufacturing side, has been happening for a long time in China. So they sort of know how to deal with it by now a little bit also compared to maybe other economies. But they are certainly very far ahead.
It's incredible.
So what should investors be thinking about? We've been talking about China forever, and for such a long time. I know when I started my career like decades ago, it was all about having access to the Chinese market. That's what was important to every global multinational company. We think differently post-COVID, post what have you. And so I do wonder how investors have to think about China's relationship with the world. We know China is friends with Iran, with Russia. We talk about this other kind of axis of power, North Korea. What is their role?
I think their role from an economic standpoint is that you have to look at what China is becoming as a state, which is that they want to be this a high-tech superpower. They want to be this industrial giant. They say we'll make the cheap goods and we'll make the advanced, sophisticated goods. And the Chinese commodity story is incredibly interesting still. I mean, what's happening with oil, but even what's happening in other places. Steel demand is down, yet China's buying up all the iron ore it can, right? So those relationships have broken down. They're not what they used to be. And so there are some interesting things happening inside the economy. And the traditional model of thinking about China just doesn't apply anymore. You really do have to kind of watch it at a granular level.
Yeah, the trade hawks still are stuck on overcapacity and subsidies, right? And we even saw Peter Navarro put out a report that's made the rounds in the past week. I mean, what do you make of all of that still hanging?
My message to my friends in DC has always been that you can talk about Chinese overcapacity all day long. It's not going to make an inch of a difference unless you can compel American companies to rethink their supply chain strategy in a very, very holistic and broad way.
As long as though the government, now here's the funny part, right? Because you have the U.S. government getting involved in our companies now. So I do wonder, kind of how ironic that this is. But as long as we know the Chinese government can actively and aggressively get involved, is it not ever going to be a market that global investors really want to embrace?
Well, if you're aligning yourself with companies that are in the state's favor, sectors that the state is favoring, then there's a pretty good chance that you could get in there and you can make money, especially with this, the plethora of companies that are IPOing out of Hong Kong now,
Right.
so, yeah, including Shanghai, of course, as well. So you've got that. But yes, you have to be very, very careful because, look at what happened to Baba and so forth. The state decides the winners and losers at the end of the day.
Just a real quick one here. What is the one thing through the end of the year that you think investors should be paying most attention to with China?
Right now, I would say figure out what could break this truce maybe past November.